feel pretty deep into this book. And so I'm glad that we've had that opportunity to be a little different. Tim gave a good outline of what we're doing next quarter, starting this coming Sunday, so I won't go back over that again. And I don't have to ask this class to do this New Year's Day and a dark Wednesday night, and you're here, but please make a commitment to come to our Bible classes. Our teachers work really hard. I'm very proud of the program that we have, and I appreciate Will and Nathan and their leadership in that area and all the people who make that work. But we're going to finish Philippians, and we have been covering it in terms of the themes that Paul has addressed in this letter that he wrote from a Roman prison cell to Philippi. And the theme that is introduced tonight, the final theme of the letter, we're calling it the gift. Namely, the gift, the financial support, the provisions sent by the Philippians through their man Epaphroditus to Paul in Rome to help him with his needs in prison. Let's go back into the background a little bit to talk about what necessitated this gift from Philippi. While he was in prison in Rome, Paul, of course, was free to write letters, obviously. We're reading one of them. There are 4 total in the New Testament canon. Those are Ephesians, Colossians, Philippians, and Philemon. And he was free to do that, free to receive visitors, to teach them while they were there, free to speak to groups and to speak his mind, and to conduct his affairs related to the gospel. He had some influence while he was in prison. We've already read in chapter 1 that his imprisonment had served for the furtherance or the advance of the gospel. And so it had become known throughout the whole imperial guard, he says, chapter 1, verse 13, that his imprisonment was for Christ. That phrase, imperial guard, has been translated in various ways, but it has something to do with the officials or the guards, the elite troops, some important people who would not have otherwise heard the gospel if Paul had not been in prison. And then at the close of the letter, chapter 4, verse 22, he mentions Caesar's household, which, some have fantasized about that being close family members to Caesar. More than likely, it's officials in his court or servants of Caesar, some people working in government affairs. They had become either sympathetic to the truth or obedient to the truth, and they had also been with Paul in that as well. So his imprisonment had enough freedom for him to spread the gospel. That's the point that I'm trying to make. However, and unlike our prison system, he had to furnish his own expenses, which, in some ways could be better for people who had means. I mean, I correspond with a few people in Alabama prison systems, and they barely have bare necessities. They write asking for hygiene packages, and they want things like soap and snacks and coffee and things like that. And so they have their basic necessities provided for them, but little more than that. And if you had means back under Paul's situation, you could live maybe a little better than that. But if you were Paul and you didn't have much to outside financial means, well, you would have trouble making it. So Paul really needed to become dependent on others, which was hard for him. I mean, what do you know about Paul when he was out on his own preaching? How did he make his living? He was a tent maker, right? I think in Acts chapter 18, we read about him becoming acquainted with Priscilla and Aquila because all 3 of them were tent makers, and he would furnish his living by tent making. He did that in Corinth, and he made a special point to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 that all preachers of the gospel have the right to earn a living by preaching the gospel, to be supported by the church. He had just waived that right so that he wouldn't become a burden upon the Corinthians. And he said that the same thing to the Thessalonians as well, I believe, in both the letters to the churches of Thessalonica, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And so you have those 2 examples where he he did not, even though it was his right, he chose not to draw support from the church. Instead, to be a vocational minister and to make his living tent making, and then he wouldn't have to burden the churches. But for 4 years or more, he'd been in prison and unable to work, and maybe longer than that. There's just no way around it. He had to become dependent on others for his livelihood. So it must have been really hard for Paul. That wasn't in his nature. Which brings us to the gift. Now, it's been mentioned a little bit here and there throughout the letter. In chapter 1, verse 5, Paul speaks of the Philippians' participation in the gospel from the first day until now. In chapter 4, verse 14, he referred to their sharing with him. Apparently, and we'll get into this a little more, they lost contact with him for a little while, but they were engaged with him again now and participating with him as partners, they providing financial support as he continued to preach the gospel in chains. And what they were giving was provisions, material provisions, food, clothing, things like that, the necessities of life. And it had come to him by way of Epaphroditus, who may or may not have been the preacher of the church of Philippi, or one of the preachers anyway. So as he concludes this letter, he speaks of their generosity, and he speaks of it not just in the present, but also in the past. This is a letter, so it's not formally arranged, and things get a little mixed up concerning the timeline. But what you see, he talks first of all about the initial gift they gave of partnership. That's in verses 14 through 17. And then he speaks of the previous gift of concern, even when they lost touch with him during his imprisonment. That backs up to verses 10 through 13. And then thirdly, he speaks of the present gift of support in verses 18 through 20. So you see it's kind of mixed up there in terms of the timeline, but we'll get all that straightened out as we work through the material. So let's start talking about these three gifts. Starting, we'll go in the order of the timeline, okay? So we're going to start with the gift of partnership. And that's explained in verses 14 through 17. Let's read that section first. Yet it was kind of you, he says, to share my trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once and again. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. Okay, so he's speaking here of their work together, and he describes it with this term translated, verse 14, share. Another way of putting that is partner. And it's a translation of a Greek term, soon koinonia. Soon meaning with or together, koinonia having to do with fellowship. And koinonia is used sometimes of business partnerships, which is more the nuance here. Sometimes it has to do with Christian fellowship. Sometimes it's a word for the Lord's Supper, translated communion. But it has that sense, and it's overemphasized with the prefix soon, meaning with, so it's like fellowship together. He's putting those words together to have the sense of just really strong partnership together in almost in a terminology that would be used in the outside world to describe a firm business partnership. But of course, it's more than business for them. It's fellowship with Paul. They take his financial burden on themselves. And he says that this happened, verse 15, they know that in the beginning of the gospel, they had been with him. I don't think he means to say when he first started preaching the gospel, and he certainly doesn't mean to go back to Acts chapter 2 and say they had been engaged since Acts 2, because Paul was the first one to bring the gospel to Philippi. He must mean the beginning of the gospel for them. When he started preaching at Philippi, they latched on at that point, and they have not let go through that whole time. So they had been with him. He's talking about the early days of Christianity in Philippi here. So this goes back way before the imprisonment and even further than that. So this is that's what that phrase means. And it describes those days. Luke writes about Acts chapter 16, verses 9 through 12. It's obvious from his words here that they began to support him when he arrived in their province of Macedonia. He says, beginning the gospel when I left Macedonia, and then he mentions Thessalonica in verse 16, which was a sister congregation to them. Philippi and Thessalonica were both in Macedonia, and then we know that they supported him when he went down into Achaia, where Corinth was, because he talks about how they were with him when he left Macedonia. So those are areas where they partnered with him in their own town, Philippi, Thessalonica, and then Corinth as well. And he says, pay close attention to this phrase. I want to talk about this a little bit. No church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. I don't know about you, but to me that describes a rather unique relationship that he had only with this congregation. Does that sound that way to you? No church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. So they had something with him no other church had, right? Now, let's keep our fingers here and go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Remember, as I was talking about this, we said that Philippi likely supported his work in Corinth. When he left Macedonia, he went down to Achaia. That's where Corinth is. And they were with him when he left Macedonia. So we assume while he was in Corinth, they were one of the churches that helped him. And he talks about that in 2 Corinthians 11. Look at verses 8 and 9. I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. Now he's writing to Corinth. So he says, I didn't take money from you. I raised it myself through tent making, and other churches helped me so I wouldn't become a burden to you. Verse 9, when I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia, that's where Philippi was, they supplied my need, so I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. Earlier in this letter, in chapters 8 and 9, he brags on the churches of Macedonia. That includes Philippi, about how liberal their giving was. And so Philippi is definitely involved here. And they kept him from having to burden the Corinthians. But he doesn't say church. He doesn't say there's just this other church that supported my work in Corinth. He speaks in the plural, right? Other churches. So that brings up this question, what made Philippi unique? He says, no other church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except only you. That's what he said in Philippians 4:15. But while he was in Corinth, there was more than one church involved. Now this is where we have to enter into a bit of conjecture. Because he never explains that out for us. But I have a theory here, and there may be other things. If you have an idea about it, you share it with me. But getting back to Philippians 4, what's going on in verse 15, the giving and receiving? Well, it could be what we call today a sponsoring church situation. Okay, we send support to missionaries all over the world. But to my knowledge, I don't think we send any support directly to the missionary. I may be wrong, Jim, but I don't think we send support directly to any missionary. We send it to a church that oversees their work. And I'll use my brother Barton as an example. He's planting a church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the church, we send his support along with other churches to the Chase Park Church of Christ, which is located in Huntsville, Alabama. And then they get a regular, steady income for him and a regular, steady working fund for his team so that work can continue and thrive in Charlotte. And he had that same kind of arrangement when he was down in Cusco, Peru. And I know Brother Philip Gonto, we're involved in his work, and there's a church in Illinois, Naperville, Illinois, that handles his support. They have some very good accounting measures there, and we really like the way they handle that, and they help him out a great deal in that way. And I think that's true of every missionary we support. Well, those churches to those missionaries have a special relationship that's different from our relationship with them. Our relationship with Barton is different from Chase Park's relationship to Barton. We just give, we don't receive anything on his behalf. But they give and they receive on his behalf. They receive from us and other churches, and they pass that on along with the support they give him, which is significant, on to him. And so that could be one thing that could be included by that language. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly what's going on. It could be a different explanation, but it may be that Philippi did that kind of thing for Paul. We just can't be for sure. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about. So that's the kind of relationship they had with him from the beginning. And to finish this out, look at verse 17. He says, "Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit." So he's not writing this to try to get them to give him more money. He's not trying to get a raise or anything like that. I'm not seeking this gift. What I want is the fruit that increases to your credit. And I think this is a great summary of the motive of Christian giving. Because what's the motive here? You give, and there's some kind of credit in heaven for that. Now, if you're uncomfortable with that, let me share with you a few passages that are more familiar to you. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. "Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your heart is, there will your treasure is, there will your heart be also." I always get those terms flip-flop. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So what does it mean to lay up treasure in heaven? I think it means the same thing as the fruit that increases to your credit. Yeah, it's money that has some kind of reward or bounty or blessing in heaven. And there's another line similar to this in the parable of the rich fool in Luke 12, verse 21. He talks about the one who is rich toward God. Rich toward God. What does that mean? Well, it must mean that as we give here, God sees in heaven, and He rewards us for the giving that we do. So he said, "I'm glad that you're doing this. It's helping me out. It's giving me food to eat and clothing for my back. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the partnership, but not so much about the comforts it's giving me, but about the credit that it's giving you for your giving." And so God smiles on those who give cheerfully and generously. And I think that's what it is. It's not that God needs anything, and not even here that Paul needed anything. So that's the first thing on the timeline here. Their gift of partnership, sunkoinonia, that happened early on in his relationship with them, that supported him to work in churches at Thessalonica, at Corinth, and elsewhere. All right, let's move on to the second gift. The second gift was the gift of concern. Gift of concern, verses 10 through 13. It actually, he turns to this gift in the second part of verse 10. So I'm going to skip the first part of verse 10. Now let's read the whole thing, but he really gets into it in the second part. Starting at verse 10. "I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me." Now here's where he gets into that middle stage of their gift. "You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Okay, so it starts off here talking about what I see as a second stage in the giving relationship. First stage, from the time he met them, established church in Philippi, there was partnership. Second stage, though, it changed. For some reason, they lost touch with him, and they could no longer have that kind of partnership with him. He was imprisoned, and they lost touch, but they were still concerned. And that was something he was thankful for as well. Their concern for him, even when they were unable to be any other thing to him. Now, maybe they lost contact with him after he left Macedonia on his way to Jerusalem. If you were in Steve's class on the book of Acts, you know the timeline well. Acts chapter 20, he's collected this contribution from the churches of Achaia and Macedonia and other places. He's delivering for the poor in Judea, and he's arrested while he is down there. Maybe they lost touch with him down there. Maybe it was due to their inability to give. You know, the Bible instructs us to give as we prosper. 1 Corinthians 16:2. And they may not have been prospering. In 2 Corinthians 8:2, he mentions their deep poverty. The deep poverty of the churches of Macedonia. That includes Philippi. And it may be that was what broke off their giving to him. We don't know exactly what it was. It was something, though. They couldn't give him anything but their love and concern. But he was appreciative for that as well. Go ahead, Ray. Yeah. You know, it never gets real specific about what the gifts were, but there were gifts that would translate into food and clothing for the people, whether it was, you know, food and clothing from the beginning or it was money to buy those things. We don't know, but we know it helped relieve poverty in the case of what Paul was doing. Well, money can be exchanged for any good or service that somebody needs. So it's the best thing because in the case of food, which is perishable, that money can be transported from one place to the other and then buy fresh food on the site of the need. So, yeah. It'll make you rich toward God. So their generosity translated into those things. Because that's what poverty is lack of those basic necessities. So, you know, it never gets specific about what exactly was collected. They were just told to lay by and store the things that were needed. And money translates into all those things, so it had to have been part of what was going on. Now, he is saying that when you couldn't give, you still gave me love and concern. That's verse 10. And he was fine during those years because he had learned the secret of contentment. So there's a little parentheses here in verses 11 through 13 where he talks about contentment. That's why we know this chapter. But you'll notice I didn't say the theme here was contentment. The theme is the gift. The way he gets into contentment from that is, in verse 10, they weren't able to support him. And there weren't many churches, if any, who were supporting him financially. And yet he was okay because he had learned to be content in whatever situation he was in. Now, this word content is translated from a Greek word autarkes, which means self-sufficient. And it was a favorite word of the Stoics. If you know anything about the Stoic philosophers, they believe that man should be self-sufficient in himself, to have all that he needs and to be completely fulfilled and satisfied despite the circumstances. But Paul wasn't using it in the Stoic way, because the Stoics said, we have what we need in ourselves according to human wisdom. And Paul said, I have all I need because I'm helped by Christ. Look at verse 13. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. That alters the Stoic philosophy. It's not self-sufficiency in myself. It's self-sufficiency despite circumstances in Christ. So there's a big difference. What circumstances? Well, he says he'd learned to be content while brought low, so in hunger and need. And he knew how to be content while abounding in times of plenty and abundance. And we know what it means to struggle with contentment in poverty. Do people struggle with contentment when they have an abundance? I've seen a few like that. You know, people who have a lot and can't be happy with what they have, and the more they get, the more miserable they seem to be. So Paul had times of plenty. He could be content in those times. Times of poverty, he was content in those times. He had learned the secret of contentment, which was your happiness, your fulfillment does not depend on outside circumstances. It depends on Jesus Christ. And so he learned that with the Lord's help, he could handle any challenge. And you'll notice he says in verse 11, he learned it. So it didn't come by him naturally. He wasn't born with it. And some have theorized that he got this gift miraculously at his conversion. That's not what happened. He didn't learn it like that. He learned it gradually through hardship and prayer. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, I think he's talking about learning contentment when he speaks of the thorn in his flesh. It was a messenger of Satan sent to buffet him. And he learned that when he was weak, he was strong. That wasn't an easy lesson to learn, and he didn't learn it overnight. When he speaks in this chapter, verses 6 and 7, about not being anxious about anything, but through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, letting your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, shall guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. That was a lot of prayer in his life that got him to the point where he wasn't anxious about being in prison or about anything. And so, suffering hardship and seeing it as the discipline of the Lord, also prayer, these things were the schoolroom in which he learned contentment. And some people don't want to learn it bad enough to go through that, but that's how you learn it, and other ways as well. And so that's the second stage here, the gift of concern. You may not be able to give money or a lot of money, but you can give love and concern. And you see, Paul put that on equal footing here with the financial support that they gave him on other occasions. Really quickly, let me get to the third gift, the gift of support. Remember verse 10, he says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. So you have a lull there in the relationship, initial partnership, then concern when they couldn't yield financial support, and now that financial support has been revived, to use the terminology of verse 10. Verse 14, he says, it was kind of you to share my trouble. So now he's speaking in present tense. They're back in that partnership with him again. And verse 18, he says, I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. A fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And my God will supply every need of yours according to His riches and glory in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. The gift, you see, had been delivered by Epaphroditus. We were introduced to Epaphroditus earlier in chapter 2, verses 25 and following. He's the man that came to Paul and that got deathly ill in Rome. And they were very concerned about him. And in fact, another reason why Paul was writing this letter was to let them know that Epaphroditus was okay and that their prayers had been answered, and that Epaphroditus was as concerned about them as they were about him. And so he delivered that gift to Paul while he was in Rome. And Paul received that gift gladly. And again, he didn't receive it as a gift for him so much as a gift for God and a gift for their credit. So here's how Christians look at giving. And this is a little bit confusing to people outside the church, and even to young people. They don't quite understand it. It's like the little boy who's going out the door. I'm trying to remember this joke. I'm not sure I'm going to get it right. He's going out the door and he says, that sermon was an hour, which is a pretty good deal for $1, which is what he put in the collection plate. And sometimes kids think, well, we're putting this in to benefit the people, the church, the preacher, or whatever, the pass the hat kind of idea. But Christians don't look at giving that way. They look at giving as going to God, all right? Which is worship, if that's what happens. You can understand why people in the world don't get that, though, because they'll say, well, wait a minute, that money is just money. It's not magical. The collection plate it's not a portal to heaven. It goes into a bank account, a worldly bank account, and then money doesn't buy anything but food and supplies and gas and housing and clothing and things like that. So how is that getting to God? God doesn't need any of those things. And of course the answer to that is, if it's being used to do the Lord's work, then it's being given to God. If it's not being used to do the Lord's work, it's not worship and it isn't being given to God. And Paul comes clearly on the side of worship with regard to giving, as you can see here in the language that he uses, verse 18. I had a man one time who argued with me about giving, and he said giving is not worship. And I asked him to contend with Philippians chapter 4, verse 18, which refers to this gift as a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. It's to Him. And he even uses that language of Old Testament sacrifices. Now think about those. Nobody questions that was worship. On the holy altar before the tabernacle or the temple, a priest would bring this sacrifice and he would slaughter it. But it was just meat. And they would cook it and people would eat it. But it was regarded as a sacrifice to God. And they would regard the aromas and the smoke going into the nostrils of God and smelling good to Him. That's, I'm putting air quotes around that because it pleased Him, not the flavor of the meat or the smell of the smoke or anything like that, but the fact that people were making sacrifices for His work to be done. And that's exactly what goes on when we pass the collection plate on Sunday mornings and people make sacrifices so that benevolent work can be done and evangelism can be done and works of edification can be done. Go ahead, Mark.
This wasn't so important to God. People could kill Ananias and Sapphira about lying about how much they get.
Yeah, that's the only case in the New Testament where God struck somebody in the church dead, and it was over the manner in which they give, and they were giving for their own glory, right? Self-worship instead of worshiping God. So it is a matter of worship. There can be no question about it. So we see as we bring the book to a close this special relationship coming through this gift and this partnership they had with him. No other church had this kind of partnership with Paul. And I think the church of Philippi, while it had its problems, was one that was very special and dear to the Apostle Paul and a good example for us as well, especially with regard to their sacrificial spirit. Thank you so much.